Hello and welcome to At the Power Table podcast, where we are breaking barriers and building the future together. Our guest today is Bavik Sing, who is actually someone I know from high school. So all the way back in South Africa, Bavik and I went to the same high school together and have taken different paths, but excitedly both ended up in. And we have a very important conversation about underground cables, skills gap in terms of delivery, and how policy interacts at the intersection of that. So I hope you enjoy. As always, please do leave us your feedback. Look at us coming all the way from high school in Lenasia. Now we're here talking energy, so far away from South Africa.
Yeah,
Yeah,
used
how
to
did
the
that
load
happen?
shed. How did that happen?
Yeah.
I guess we both took a path where we studied various things. I know you studied accounting.
Mhm.
I went the engineering route.
Yeah.
But yeah, with the way my career is taken to get me in energy, I didn't think I'll be in energy,
Oh,
to
really?
be honest.
How are you liking
Yeah.
energy so far?
No, it's good. It's good. I definitely feel like this. I've been in a lot of sectors to date. Like I studied civil engineering and I graduated and I specialized in structural engineering. So I was more into, high-end apartments, residential. I did work on the airports, hospitals and schools. So I was always looking at buildings and that sort of thing. And yeah, now I'm in energy. So it's a completely different market. But ever since entering it, I'm in it now for about 4 years. I think this is where I actually feel the most at home. It's the most energizing sector to be in.
No pun intended.
Pun definitely intended.
What has been your experience? Tell me about the other stuff. Like what's different about the energy sector?
I think the energy sector is now looking as it's the most it's a sector with the most eyes on it at the moment. And the reason being is because if you look at the energy sector from when it started, at first when it started at the inception of electricity and all of that, everyone was focused on getting access to it. Then once we started getting access to it, sustainability became a story. How are we producing our electricity? So it's always been changing. And I think now we're in a very niche or very weird place where we're trying to balance out affordability. And with this whole issue that's going on in the Middle East, it's also security of issue of electricity, of energy. As much as that's affecting the oil and all of that, it's got a direct implication on energy in our homes and businesses. So I think because of that, it's very complex issues. It's issues that affect the public as a whole. I think that's what's got me most interested. Whereas before, when I was busy doing like all of these structural engineering projects, it's for people, but it was for a small group of people. Whereas now I think my reach in terms of whatever solutions we come up with, I think it's a lot more of a community reach than just one specific group.
That is very cool. I love that. Tell me, what do you do? It's probably probably a good starting point where we should have started in terms of what
Yeah, no problem.
does an engineer do in the energy space?
So yeah, I'll just give you a small background. As I mentioned, I studied civil. I went into structural. I was mainly a design engineer. So I was always on the design element and got a lot of on-site experience. And after a while, I went and got my chartership in engineering. And that was mainly through my design experience. But once I got my chartership, I knew for a long time before that project management was where I wanted to be because I like executing projects. I like bringing groups of people together to deliver a solution or come up with a solution and implement it. So that's always been my forte. And as soon as I got my chartership, I was like, I'm going for this career change into energy or into project management. And one of the first roles I landed was as a energy project manager. So it was my first role in it. But as far as the jump from civil structural engineering to project management in the energy space, I think being an engineer, being a project manager that knows how engineers think has always made that transition very easy. I'm not a technical expert in this field. However, I understand how to communicate with the engineers. And I think that's what I've always enjoyed about this as well.
That's really cool. Can you give us a flavor of like what kind of projects do you pull people together for? Like, what are you managing?
So I'm part of the grid. I work a lot on grids. Now, the grid as it on its own need to be maintained. So it's a lot with I don't really work on the maintenance side, but I'm more on upgrading it, expanding it, and protecting it. And together with the grid, we have the substations that's also interconnected. So all within that space, that's where my projects are. I have a lot of facilitation with connecting customers or connecting data centers into it, connecting wind farms and solar farms into it, both onshore and offshore. So I mainly work on land, but it's to strengthen the grid and make it better.
So we're talking transmission lines, and that's upgrading, building new
It's only
transmission.
it's only transmission
Okay.
lines, so it's mainly high voltage that ranges from 110 kV to at least 400 kV at this point. So yeah, it's the high end in terms of energy transfer.
And for anyone who doesn't understand it, I like to think of it, and I think I've stolen this example from National Grid. Courtney, who was on the podcast, explained it where she said transmission is basically like the highways, and then distribution are the little roads that connect to it and transport energy to that. I want to pick up on a point you mentioned, data centers. Obviously, AI is all the rage, and everyone wants to use AI, and it's fun, and you should definitely be using it safely and responsibly and ethically and. But what does AI mean for transmission and electricity as a whole?
I think for electricity as a whole, AI has boosted or increased the demand for electricity quite significantly. I'll go back to when a lot of these grid systems were designed and built. They were designed and built in the east to 60s, maybe early 70s. So what we do need to thank our 2 generations ago forefathers was that they actually designed a grid that would last for so many years, because no way did they know back then that we're going to have data centers for AI. And yet we are still able to use the grid that we have. 100% the grid is at its what's end at the moment. That's across the board in all countries, because our demand for electricity has just increased. Lots of people are also so reliant on electricity, much more than we used to be. Back then in the 50s and 70s, your energy from a home perspective was very limited. You maybe just had a washing machine, fridge, iron, and a couple of lights. Whereas now, just my whole setup at home, I've got a TV, 2 laptops, 2 cell phones. It's crazy. So electricity demand was always going to increase. But the fact that our forefathers before actually had the foresight for this has been good. However, coming back to your question about what AI and all of that demand will bring on us going forward, is we're in a very challenging position now. As I mentioned, we've got a grid that's at its wit's end. Its design life is coming to an end. Its capacity, it's at its peak. So number one, all the capacity needs to be increased. It all needs to be uprated, up voltaged. That's number one. And that goes for both the transmission lines and substation equipment alike. Number two, electricity is being generated in areas that are very remote, especially when you're looking at renewable energy. So if the argument is that we're going to offset the demand from data centers with renewable energy, it's a good argument. However, do we have that infrastructure to facilitate that? And it's hard to say that we do at this point. So it's very complex. And I think AI is just one small element when you look at the whole perspective of how our energy demand has gone up. The demand in these countries are going up, and energy prices are going up and up. So it's a very complex ecosystem we've built up, where we've got a grid, we're trying to connect onto it, we're trying to expand it, and we're trying to let it run at the same time. Very hard to come up with a solution for that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting time in terms of energy and what we're trying to do here. I want to pick up on what you said. People before us, so both the men and the women who are designing the energy system, have had the foresight to design it in such a way that it lasts for a really long time. So durability is really important. In terms of what we're trying to do now, and keep it in mind of building on that principle of making sure it's built to last, what are the things you think we need to be thinking of when we're designing the energy, the grid, or the new transmission system, etc.?
I think the main thing we need to understand is we need to work together. We need to work together. We can't just look at the electricity grid as a system on its own. We need to work with other linear utilities, that being roads, rail, water, and wastewater. If we have a road that's going from A to B, we need to work together with the energy market, and let's go and put an underground cable there to deliver electricity. Let's put water pipeline as well as a sewage pipeline. That's number one. We need to start to work together. And I think that's always been a bit of a stifling point with the engineering and build community, is that we like to work in our silos because it's easier. But we need to force collaboration. When we start doing that, I think of it from the consumer point of view, because as much as I'm a part of the grid infrastructure development, I'm also a consumer of it at the same time. Not everyone wants to see these massive overhead lines in our space. We just don't want to see that. So if we work together with other linear utilities, we can start to navigate and expand, and we also building a community that will have all of its infrastructure needs one time, as opposed to everyone going about it in their own way. So I think that would be the big start point.
Yeah, so I agree in terms of there needs to be holistic planning and development, and that includes not just energy, but also other sectors to look at how we leverage and we plan for long-term future. I think I less agree when we start talking underground cables. So it's very interesting that a transmission person is pro underground cables. Talk to me about that perspective.
I think I'm a bit pro underground cables because I just feel that when we look at the way our communities have been built, or rather our towns have been built, we are so congested. We are so congested. There is no way for us to run cables apart from underground. And there's nothing, I personally don't think there's anything wrong with going underground. If it's a technology, it is something that has a lot of risk, as anything, but it's something that we can utilize. It's something that I think, if done correctly with the correct risk assessment method statements being put in place, it can be done. It's also a good way to protect the community from any issues. There's a lot of issues with these aging infrastructure on the grid specifically, whereby cables are at risk of falling down due to the degradation of the supporting structures. So if I look at it from that point of view, there's a good argument to be made for underground cables. It's a lot more pricier, 100%, but I think the fact that our communities have already been built, I can't see any other way apart from going underground.
It's an interesting perspective. I think there's definitely merit in terms of underground is safer from a perspective of climate change and that increasing, and therefore having more extreme weather events, which will then put the community at risk. But I guess it's that classic balance of short term versus long term. So maybe in the long term, it's better resilience, but then it also begs the question of long term, what does that mean for maintenance? So every time you have to maintain it, do you have to dig the ground up again? And what does that actually mean for people and land? I think also long term is land use, like the soil, and what impact does it have long term underground is not yet known. So I think
I completely agree with you there. Completely. There's a lot of issues with that. But I think also, going back to my first the first point I made with regards to utilities working together, I think when you're going to build this tunnel, let's just call it a tunnel, that's going to be a a lot more bigger just for our utility space. It should be able to to sort out all of those maintenance issues because you have access. You're not just going to have one pipeline for water and only access for water maintenance. You're going to have congested corridors with all of these sort of utilities. But if you just make one corridor or one tunnel, I think there's merit in it, but I completely agree with your point. There's a lot of issues with regarding to that technology.
Yeah, I think for me, why I am less sold on underground is not just the long term. I think it's more just the short term in terms of affordability. So I work in energy too. And one of the examples we've heard from Australia is Australia was trying to do full underground with their transmission cables. And it was an equity issue where in affluent areas, or areas where households were richer and had higher incomes, and for example, were on the coastline and didn't want their view of the coast to be damaged by or destroyed by the fact that there's a transmission line or some cables running through, they were very happy to be take on that extra cost onto their bills. Whereas within the city, like as you move closer into the city in more congested spaces where they have lower income households, they were less keen to take on that price adjustment to their bills, which then begs the question of who takes that cost, right? How do you split it equitable? Because ultimately, if the government's funding it, then the taxpayer's funding it. And if you're sitting between a cost of living crisis and an energy crisis, you can't really be asked to be, I'm going to pay extra bills on my energy so that the cable goes underground. Like, I just don't think we're there yet with the technology to make a solid.
No, 100%. If I think about it from a more technical on the grounds perspective as well, when you're looking at this grid expansion and all of that, there's a fundamental issue when it comes to gaining planning permission. Now, I'm not saying that underground cables is a scapegoat or a loophole, but if you are in an energy crisis and if you are looking to fast track getting the grid upgraded, ground cables does take away that issue. That's a very small issue. Look, I think there's arguments both for and against it. I can't say that you haven't convinced me otherwise. You have given me a lot of things that I would also consider, because it's a good way to think about how we look at things. Like, you certainly have a perspective, and I definitely do. But looking at it from your perspective, I completely get it.
Yeah. And I mean, this is important, right? These are the kind of conversations we should be having. Because yes, it is better to have it underground and not see it, but they come with implications. So there's pros and cons to both, and I completely agree with that. But a very important conversation to have nonetheless.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I do think, like, I do come from a vantage point of an engineer that just wants to get things done and wants it to function. That may not necessarily be the correct way to do about it. And that's why you need different stakeholders to come up with solutions. And it's working together with everyone. But yeah, the future, we'll have to see how it goes.
I agree. I can get to the perspective of that everyone has to have a voice at the table because it's so important. And I think our discussion has just highlighted that, which is so brilliant. You are on the ground managing projects. You've obviously seen an array of different projects. You've seen that you have had to manage lots of challenges to push the energy transition forward. If you were given a mic, and this message that you were about to say would go to every single policymaker in Europe, let's say, what is the things you would want policymakers to know that comes from the vantage point of someone on the ground delivering these projects that you don't think either they've heard it before, not just quite implementing it fast enough, never heard it before, or have heard it, but you think it's just super important to reiterate?
That's a very good question you pose. And I'll start to answer that question by stating that everyone's looking at fancy windmills and solar power plants and getting all of these guys connected to the grid. Those are 100% important. But we need to first prioritize my message to all of those policymakers is before you start accepting getting all of these generators on of sustainable electricity, we need to first get our grid up to scratch. I like to compare it to this. Having a fully functional solar power farm on a grid that cannot handle the capacity is equivalent to buying a Ferrari and not having a road to drive on. So, it is a balance that we need to do.
That's really practical advice. I love that. In terms of that not enough equipment for underground, I think that's even if you're going underground or overground, there is definitely a skills gap. What, in your perspective, having been project managing number of projects, have you seen from the skills perspective? Does it exist? Does it not exist?
There's a very big gap when it comes to the skills. I think especially in Europe, there's a very, very big skills gap. And that's simply because I think the systems are always built to last for a long time, and they have, but now there is some massive work that's required across the board. A lot of my colleagues that I would work with, they come from the likes of Brazil, Southern Africa, West Africa, East Africa. A good amount of technical knowledge comes from Australia. I know you mentioned Australia as well. And it's just a matter of getting all of those people to come in with their perspectives. Yes, they need to be integrated into whichever regional land they go to try and implement their solutions. But there needs to be some buy-in from policymakers and all of that to start accepting what's been used in other regions. And I don't mean that we need to bring someone from Australia and tell them how to run the show in Europe somewhere. I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is the rest of the world, be it even from the likes of America, that is a first world country, everyone's got lessons learned. And we need to stop holding on to this IP of lessons learned. It needs to be shared, and we need to start to actually trust one another. I think that's the main thing. It just comes with trust. And when you look at energy security, which I mentioned previously, it comes with trust. And I think that's where we start with it.
So what are the things we have to do to build that global trust? Because it sounds simple, but we're talking about global
It's very
trust.
complicated. It's very complicated. And as an engineer, I'll be completely honest. I am not the right person to give you advice on how to get people to work together, right? And this is completely off the cuff as to what I think the problems are. I think everything that comes to our problems today is with people not communicating, misconceptions. If, for example, a region is going to go build a nuclear generating facility, which I still believe there's a clean energy source. Lots of safety issues and stuff because of issues in the past. But from a physics point perspective, it's completely safe. It's completely doable to be implemented. However, there's a people's perception that's a problem. And also, suddenly, if you're building a nuclear power plant, it can be considered for other reasons, which goes into the mistrust amongst nations. So I think it just comes to a point where we need to start to talk openly with one another, get all of your cards on the table. Again, easier said than done.
Yeah, I think that's probably highlighting a lot of the complications and challenges practitioners like yourself or even policymakers face on a daily basis in the energy industry. There's always a trade-off, right? There's always if I do this, then it's going to impact that. If I don't do this, this is how it will impact that. And it's not just the energy industry. Because energy is so central to the way we live, the way we operate, and every single thing we do, it's so intrinsically connected that you can't just make siloed decisions by itself, which is really fascinating. I love asking this question. Very keen to get your perspective. In terms of if you were given a magic wand, so no policy issues, no perception issues, no money issues, no issues whatsoever, and you were to do 3 changes max to either the European or the global market, in energy, what would you do?
Interconnectors, number one. Again, I'm assuming there's no issues in terms of everyone's around the same table singing Kumbaya. Interconnectors, number one. And it needs to be global, whether that's practical or not. But I still think as soon as one place or one region has an energy crisis, we are all going to help one another out as the human race. So number one, interconnectors. Number two, if from a more practical on the ground perspective, there needs to be a lot more of trust with technologies that we don't necessarily have a lot of experience in. Or if we have experience, it maybe was a bad experience. So I'd say put trust in those things, or take away all of those issues. Number three, I think energy needs to be given a bigger voice. It is a privilege, but it's come to a point now where I believe it's a right of everyone. You can't, there's no way you can go about your life now without energy. Unfortunately, we are a slave to it, but it is what it is at this point. I'd say those would be my three.
Sorry, there was no pressure to actually do three, but I love that you answered the question. Full marks for answering the complete question.
Thanks.
Talk to me about interconnectors, because we have interconnectors, right?
Yeah.
So what?
So interconnectors basically are connecting one grid to the other, or one national grid to another national grid. They can be landlocked. So if you share a land border with another country, or it can even be offshore. So connecting an island to a big mass or to a mainland. Those are interconnectors there. They basically underground or undersea cables, or in the cases of on land interconnectors, they could be overhead lines or even underground cables. Basically, all that they are agreements between two regions or two countries that in certain times they will piggyback off one another and support one another when there's a time of need. Like a good example to where interconnectors were used very well was last year, Spain had a major blackout. And within a day or two, the grid was back up. They piggybacked off of their neighboring countries, who then even piggybacked off of other countries. They came to the rescue, and Spain is part of the EU, so that just shows how the EU works well together. And that can be used everywhere. That can be used in Africa, anywhere for that matter, yeah.
So what is the call to action then? Is it just interconnectors everywhere?
Interconnectors are one thing. If I have to call to action, I'd say everyone needs to start prioritizing getting their grids more future-proofed. I think that's the main one. Once you do that, it facilitates interconnectors. It facilitates renewables being connected on, because if we're going to have an interconnector, but the grid is not up to capacity, again, we got the Ferrari.
Same Ferrari example. I love that. Very practical advice. Get your own stuff sorted first and then interconnectors. That has been awesome. I think we've had a very important conversation around underground cables, interconnectors, and what that means in terms of collaborating both within your country in terms of different multi-utilities, multi-industries, but then also broadly more globally as well. My final question: if you were giving a young Bavik at the beginning of his career advice, what advice would that be?
I'd say it's a good question, because I think when I think back when I just started, a lot of engineers, and I know I don't want this podcast to go on about me just advocating for engineers, but I do think that there's been a lot of misconception or mistrust or misunderstanding rather, of what exactly we do and why we are important for the global economy as well as infrastructure. When I was a young grad, I always looked at how so many engineers were going into banks and audit firms and all of those places, and obviously they were getting much more compensated than we were as graduate engineers. And it does make you wonder, did we choose the right path or anything? And I think what I just tell the younger self is stick with it. What you don't get in monetary value at the beginning, comes back in fulfillment in other ways. Like like I said, I was a structural engineer. What I like about being a structural engineer was that's my building that I design on my coffee table. Like, it's such a sense of fulfillment that I don't think I would have gotten anywhere else. So stick with it.
I love that. Such super practical, but such simple advice. Sometimes, so often, we just chase the monetary when there's so much more to be gained. So really, really practical. I love that so much. Bavik, it's been an absolute treat to have you. Yeah.
Thanks a lot,
Oh,
Zenobia.
what a privilege to have that on the podcast, to be able to bring to you what it's like having those decisions in the industry, how many things there is to consider, what are the intricacies. There is the medium term, short term, long term. I'm not sure why I started with the medium term, but you get my point. There's timing, there's an array of stakeholders, the government, the communities, the energy industry, the energy transition, competing priorities. We need to move fast to transition. We need to make sure we have affordability. We need to make sure that it's resilient for a long-term future. So many things to consider, and I'm really, really glad that we got to have that conversation. I'm also really glad that that conversation has created space for everybody else to share their perspectives, and we'd love to understand what you think about overground versus underground cables. Do you care? Do you care that it impacts your bills? Do you care if it impacts your view? What is it that is what do you think? And more importantly, what do you want to hear more of? For our next guest, we have Kona Inez, who is just an incredible human. He does so many things that you're probably going to have to wait for that for the next podcast. So my advice, please like, subscribe, and make sure you don't miss that episode. Take care. Bye.